Long before the river learned how to move, before the forest learned how to breathe, there was a silence so wide it felt endless. The sky did not rush across the heavens the way it does now. Clouds lingered, as if unsure whether to move on. Light spilled gently over a world made mostly of water, reflecting itself again and again until the horizon disappeared into pale blue haze. This was the Amazon, but not the Amazon anyone remembers. This was a place before memory learned how to hold on to names. The lake stretched farther than the eye could follow. A vast body of warm, shallow water resting patiently against the shape of the continent. It did not crash or roar, it did not demand attention. It existed quietly, confidently, knowing there was no need to hurry. The water shimmered under the ancient sun, carrying with it the slow pulse of the earth itself. Every ripple felt intentional, every movement unafraid of time. Along its edges, where water kissed land without urgency, life gathered gently. Plants rose from the shallows in thick green clusters, their leaves wide and heavy, floating like open hands. Beneath the surface, creatures moved with the kind of calm that comes only when survival is not a daily panic. Massive turtles drifted like living islands, their shells worn smooth by centuries of sun and rain. Ancient crocodilians glided silently below them, patient and unthreatened, knowing that hunger would always return when it was ready. Nothing here needed to conquer, nothing needed to escape. This was a world that understood balance long before the word existed. The air was warm but forgiving, wrapping itself around everything it touched. Rain came often, but never violently. It fell the way a deep breath falls from tired lungs, steady and necessary. When it stopped, mist hovered above the water, blurring the line between sky and lake until the two felt like the same endless thing. In those moments, it was impossible to tell where the world ended and where it began. Time behaved differently here. Days did not feel counted. Years did not feel earned. The lake did not measure itself against yesterday or tomorrow. It simply continued, holding space for life to unfold slowly, carefully, without fear of interruption. Evolution moved not with struggle, but with patience. Small changes accumulated quietly, unnoticed by the creatures living through them. No one here knew they were ancient. No one knew they were temporary. Far away, millions of years later, a man stood at the edge of modern Earth, feeling something he could not quite explain. Dr. Elias Moreno rested his hand against a low cliff of exposed sediment, layers of ancient mud and mineral compressed into silent bands of color. His fingers traced lines that had once rested beneath warm water, beneath drifting leaves and passing shadows. He closed his eyes, and the present loosened its grip. He had spent his life studying landscapes that no longer existed, places erased not by catastrophe, but by time's quiet persistence. Yet standing here, he felt something deeper than academic fascination. There was grief in this soil. Not sharp grief, not violent grief, but the slow ache of something beautiful that had ended without farewell. He imagined the lake as it once was, spreading endlessly where forest now stood. He imagined water touching the sky, light dancing across its surface, life unfolding without awareness of an ending. He imagined silence, not emptiness, but peace, the kind of peace that comes when nothing is trying to be more than it is. Elias opened his eyes and looked at the river nearby, the modern Amazon flowing with purpose and power. It moved quickly, urgently, carrying sediment, memory, and loss toward the ocean. It was magnificent in its own way, but it felt restless, as if it remembered being something else. The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment he could almost hear the lake breathing beneath the forest floor. Not gone, just transformed. Long ago, before rivers carved their paths with determination, water gathered instead of fleeing. The land was flatter, softer, more willing to hold. Mountains to the west had not yet risen high enough to block the flow of ancient seas, and so the water stayed. It pooled, spread, rested. It formed a world where boundaries blurred and life adapted not to extremes, but to consistency. Fish grew larger here, slower there, bodies shaped by abundance rather than desperation. Shells thickened, patterns formed, generations passed without urgency. The lake offered enough for everyone willing to move with its rhythm. Predators hunted, but never too much. Prey survived, but never without challenge. Balance held everything together like an unspoken agreement. When the sun dipped low, its reflection stretched across the water in molten gold, and shadows lengthened beneath the surface. The lake cooled slightly, exhaling warmth into the night air. Stars emerged, mirrored perfectly below, until the world felt suspended between two skies. If anything had been there to witness it with human awareness, it might have felt infinite. But no one was watching, and perhaps that is why it was so perfect. Elias knelt and brushed loose soil from a fossilized shell embedded in the rock. It was small, unremarkable to most eyes, but to him it was proof. Proof that the stories written in stone were real. Proof that the earth had lived many lives before offering one to humanity. Proof that permanence was always an illusion. He thought about how icily humans believe the present is the default setting of the world. How forests feel eternal until they are gone. How rivers feel unchangeable until they shift. How silence is rarely noticed until noise replaces it. The mega lake had not failed. It had not been destroyed. It had simply existed long enough to make room for what came next. Back in the ancient world, storms rolled across the water slowly, their thunder distant and low. Rain fell in wide sheets, blurring the horizon even further. Beneath the surface, the lake absorbed the sound, the energy, the movement, smoothing everything into calm again. It was a world that knew how to absorb impact without breaking. Plants along the shore bent, but did not uproot. Animals sought shelter without panic. Nothing here feared the sky. The lake held memory without remembering. It carried history without recording. It allowed life to be fully present, never burdened by what came before or what might follow. In that way, it was kinder than the world that would replace it. Elias stood as evening settled around him, the modern forest humming with insects and unseen movement. He felt the weight of time press gently against his chest. Not overwhelming, not frightening, just honest. He wondered how many other lost worlds slept beneath human footsteps, their stories unheard, their beauty unmissed because it was never known. He whispered softly, not to anyone, but to the land itself. A thank you, for existing, for lasting as long as it did, for leaving behind clues gentle enough to be found by those willing to listen. The lake, long gone in form but not in essence, seemed to answer in the steady flow of the river nearby. Water moving now, always moving, carrying the memory of stillness within it, and as the night deepened, as stars reappeared above the forest canopy, the ancient world felt closer than the present, not because it demanded remembrance, but because it offered perspective, a reminder that change is not always loss, and endings are often beginnings that have not yet learned their new names. The earth had once chosen stillness here, and in that stillness, it had created something so gentle, so balanced, that even millions of years later, its echo could still be felt by a single human hand resting on stone. The lake no longer needed to exist to be real. It had already been enough. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel. The lake did not awaken in the morning because it had never truly slept. Light arrived slowly, spreading across the surface like a gentle promise rather than a command. Mist lifted in thin, delicate veils, revealing water that seemed to glow from within. The world breathed together, unhurried, as if time itself had learned patience by watching this place exist. Life here did not fight for attention. It unfolded quietly, layer by layer, moment by moment. Beneath the surface, schools of fish moved as one, not out of fear, but familiarity. They had learned the shape of this water across generations, memorized its temperature, its depth, its moods. Their bodies carried the knowledge of abundance, shaped not by scarcity, but by trust. Along the shallow edges, where roots reached down and water reached up, plants thrived in thick, overlapping communities. Leaves floated wide and heavy, catching sunlight and rain alike. Flowers bloomed not to be admired, but because blooming was simply what they did. Insects hovered gently above the surface, tracing invisible paths that repeated day after day, never needing to be written down. The lake gave without asking. It fed without counting. It held life without owning it. Massive turtles surfaced slowly, their ancient eyes reflecting the sky. They carried the calm of centuries within them, moving with a confidence that came from knowing there was no rush to become anything else. Crocodilians rested near the banks, jaws slightly open, regulating their warmth, watching the world with patient awareness. They were powerful, but never wasteful. Hunger arrived, and hunger passed. Balance always returned. Even death, when it came, did not feel like an interruption. Bodies returned to water, to sediment, to the slow embrace of the lake. Nothing was lost. Everything was recycled into continuation. This was a world that did not measure success by growth alone, but by harmony. Evolution here was not a race upward, but a widening outward. Life did not compete to dominate the lake. It learned to fit within it. Far in the future, Elias sat quietly beside his equipment, notebook untouched, eyes resting on the modern river. He had spent years translating data into models, patterns into theories, but moments like this resisted analysis. The more he learned about the ancient lake, the more it felt less like a geological feature and more like a memory humanity had forgotten it once shared. He imagined what it must have felt like to exist in a world where nothing hurried you forward, where survival did not depend on constant vigilance, where the environment did not threaten collapse, but offered continuity. A thought filled him with warmth and an unexpected ache. The lake had raised life the way a parent raises a child, not by force, but by presence. In the Miocene world, seasons shifted gently. There were no violent extremes, no sudden betrayals of climate. Rainfall nourished the land without drowning it. Dry periods invited rest, not desperation. The water level rose and fell in slow rhythms that creatures learned instinctively, responding not with panic, but with adjustment. New species emerged without fanfare, slight changes in shell thickness, subtle shifts in jaw shape, fins growing broader or narrower depending on the needs of the water. No moment marked the birth of something new. No announcement was made. Change happened quietly, so softly that even life itself did not notice it was becoming something else. Above the lake, birds with wide wings glided lazily, calling out not warnings, but acknowledgments. Their cries echoed gently, absorbed by water and vegetation, never sharp enough to startle. The air carried sound the way it carried scent, dispersing it evenly, without urgency. At night, the lake reflected the stars so clearly that it felt like floating through the sky. Creatures moved beneath constellations mirrored below, unaware that they were suspended between. The moon traced a slow silver path across the water, rising and falling with the same calm certainty as the lake itself. Elias felt a strange longing as he imagined it. Not the desire to visit, but the desire to remember, as if somewhere deep in human instinct there remained an echo of that stillness, that balance, that permission to exist without constant struggle. Modern humanity had grown loud, fast, restless. It had learned to extract rather than receive, to dominate rather than adapt. The ancient lake stood in quiet contrast, a reminder that another way had once been possible. The soil beneath Ilias's feet held the remains of that lesson. In the ancient world, storms came and went without leaving scars. Winds bent reeds but did not uproot them. Waves lapped gently, never rising high enough to threaten the shore. Even conflict among animals felt measured, contained within invisible boundaries that no one crossed too far. The lake did not reward excess. Creatures that took too much found themselves weakened. Those that moved with restraint thrived. Balance was not enforced, it emerged naturally, shaped by long stretches of stability rather than moments of crisis. The water itself carried nutrients slowly, evenly, ensuring that no region starved while another bloomed wildly. Sediment settled gently, layer upon layer, recording time not in violence, but in patience. Each layer was a quiet year. Each year was a quiet story. Elias picked up a small sample of that sediment, letting it fall slowly back to the ground. Millions of years compressed into dust, slipping through his fingers. He wondered how many human civilizations would pass in the time it took the lake to change by even a fraction. The thought was humbling, comforting, frightening. The ancient lake had no awareness of its own generosity. It did not know it was creating conditions that would shape one of the most biodiverse regions Earth would ever know. It did not know that its stillness was laying the groundwork for future forests, future rivers, future lives. It simply existed as it was. Creatures born into this world knew nothing else. They did not imagine escape. They did not anticipate disaster. Their lives were measured not by fear of tomorrow but by fullness of today. Even predators hunted with restraint, guided by instinct refined through centuries of balance. This abundance did not make life careless, it made it attentive. When everything is given freely, it must still be respected. The lake taught that lesson gently. Over time, Elias closed his eyes and listened to the modern forest around him. Insects buzzed, birds called, leaves shifted. Life still existed in layers, still reached for balance. But there was tension now, a tightness in the air that spoke of urgency, of fragility. The ancient calm was harder to find. He wondered if humanity could ever relearn that patience, or if the conditions that allowed it had vanished along with the lake. In the Miocene world, the sun climbed higher, warming the water evenly. Creatures adjusted without thought. Shade shifted, depths offered relief. Nothing resisted the cycle because nothing needed to control it. The lake did not promise permanence. It offered continuity instead, and in that continuity, life flourished not because it feared the end, but because it trusted the present. Elias felt tears gather unexpectedly, not from sadness alone, but from recognition. The lake represented something deeply human, that humanity itself had lost the ability to exist without constant extraction, without endless acceleration, without fear that stillness meant stagnation. He imagined the lake as a living heart, beating slowly beneath the continent, circulating life gently rather than forcing it forward. A heart that would one day change its rhythm, not out of failure, but necessity. The ancient world did not resist change when it came. It would adapt, transform, dissolve into something new. But in this long moment of abundance, it existed fully, unapologetically, beautifully, and perhaps that was enough. The day faded gently into evening, the lake cooled, releasing warmth back into the sky. Creatures settled into rest without anxiety. Stars returned, steady and familiar. The world repeated itself, not because it was trapped, but because repetition brought comfort. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of modern responsibility press lightly against his chest. The ancient lake could not teach humanity how to survive its own speed, but it could offer perspective, a reminder that life once thrived without domination, without conquest, without urgency. The lake had raised life with kindness, and in doing so, it had left behind a quiet truth, buried beneath layers of time, waiting patiently to be rediscovered by those willing to listen slowly enough. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. Change did not arrive with violence. It did not announce itself with fire or collapse. It came the way time always does, softly, persistently, without asking permission. The lake did not know the moment it began to fade, because fading was not something it understood. It had existed too long in stillness to recognize motion as a threat. Far to the west, the earth stirred beneath itself. Pressure accumulated slowly, patiently, in places unseen. Stone pressed against stone, heat gathered, and the ground responded not with urgency, but with resolve. The Andes began to rise, not in dramatic leaps, but in millimeters that meant nothing to a single lifetime, and everything to eternity. At first, the lake felt nothing. Water still rested against the land, sunlight still danced across its surface, life still unfolded with the same gentle rhythm it always had. But beneath that calm, pathways were changing. Channels shifted, gradients adjusted. The land was learning how to tilt. Water, which had always stayed, began to feel the suggestion of movement. It was subtle enough to go unnoticed. A slight pull here, a longer linger there. Sediment that once settled quietly now drifted just a little farther before resting. The lake absorbed the change the way it absorbed everything else, with patience. Creatures adapted without fear. Fish followed currents that barely existed yet. Plants extended roots into new directions. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt urgent. The world was still generous, but generosity does not mean permanence. Seasons passed, then centuries, then ages. The mountains continued their slow ascent, reshaping the balance between land and water. The lake, once content to spread, now felt edges forming where there had been none. Shallows grew shallower. Distant regions thinned into wetlands. Stillness began to fragment. Life responded the only way it knew how, by adjusting. Some creatures found new paths, following water as it leaned eastward. Others adapted to shrinking depths, evolving forms better suited to channels and flow. Some could not adjust quickly enough, their bodies shaped for a world that no longer existed. Their disappearance was not marked. Their absence became part of the sediment. Loss arrived quietly. Ilya stood near the riverbank, eyes fixed on the steady movement of modern water. He imagined the ancient lake feeling that first pull, that subtle invitation to move on. He wondered if stillness could feel fear, or if fear belonged only to minds aware of endings. Perhaps the lake did not mourn. Perhaps it simply transformed. The idea brought him no comfort. The water began to choose direction. What had once been a body became a system. Channels formed, then connected, then deepened. The lake did not vanish all at once. It unraveled, strand by strand, leaving behind pockets of memory-isolated basins, wetlands, remnants clinging to the shape of what had been. The sky watched without comment. Rain still fell, sun still rose, but the reflections changed. Where once light stretched endlessly, now it broke into lines, bending along pathways of movement. The world had learned how to flow. Creatures born into this transition knew nothing of the old stillness. They adapted without grief, their instincts tuned to the world as it was, not as it had been. Only the sediment remembered everything. Elias knelt and pressed his palm into the earth again, feeling the cool weight beneath his skin. These layers were not just records of time. They were memories of balance lost and reborn as something else. He imagined the lake thinning, retreating, releasing water the way a long-held breath finally escapes. There was no single moment of ending, no final sunset over a vast horizon of water, just gradual absence, soft enough to be mistaken for continuity. The ancient giants of the lake adjusted or vanished. Turtles grew smaller. Crocodilians followed channels into narrower worlds. Fish learned speed, learned navigation, learned urgency. The lake that had once rewarded patience now required movement. Still, nothing was wasted. As water flowed away, it carried nutrients, seeds, sediments. Life followed. Forests began to rise where water had rested, roots claiming soil enriched by millions of years of quiet generosity. What the lake released, the land received. Transformation replaced loss, but that did not make loss disappear. Elias felt that tension deeply. As a scientist, he understood necessity. As a human, he felt grief. The world he imagined, the stillness, the balance, the abundance had not survived. It had become something else, something faster, something louder. The river gained strength, carving its way eastward, connecting the continent to the sea. What had once been a resting place became a journey. Water learned purpose. The first true flow of the Amazon was not dramatic. It did not roar. It simply continued, gathering confidence as it went, fed by rain, guided by gravity, shaped by the land's new intention. Over time it deepened, widened, strengthened. A river was born not from destruction, but from release. The lake did not resist. That was the hardest truth. The ancient world did not cling to itself. It did not demand remembrance. It allowed change to take its shape, trusting that continuation mattered more than preservation. Elias looked at the river again, its surface catching light in quick, restless patterns. It carried energy now, urgency. It moved as if it knew where it was going, even if no one else did. Beneath that motion, however, he sensed something slower, memory of stillness embedded deep within the flow. The river was the lake, still trying to exist in motion. As centuries turned into millions of years, the transformation completed itself. The mega lake became history, its name lost until humans invented one for it. Forests rose thick and dense. Rain increased. Biodiversity exploded. The Amazon became something new, something powerful, something alive in a different way. But beneath the roots and rivers, beneath the noise and growth, the lake remained present in absence. Elias felt tears form again, not from despair, but from understanding. Nothing truly ends, it only changes form. Stillness becomes motion, motion becomes forest, forest becomes memory, memory becomes story. The lake had not died, it had become everything else. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the modern landscape. The river continued its journey without pause, carrying echoes of ancient water toward the ocean. Elias stood quietly, feeling the weight of transformation settle into him. The loss was real. The change was inevitable. And perhaps that was the lesson hidden beneath layers of stone and time, that grief and gratitude could exist together. That endings could be beginnings without celebration, that the earth did not owe permanence to beauty. As night approached, the forest grew louder, alive with motion and sound. The stillness of the ancient lake felt distant now, almost impossible to imagine. Yet Elias knew it was there, resting beneath everything, patient as it had always been. The river flowed on, and the world continued, carrying the memory of what it once was into what it had chosen to become. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel. The river moved forward without ever looking back. It did not pause to honor what it once was, nor did it hesitate in becoming what it had to be. Water flowed eastward now, guided by gravity and time, carrying with it the memory of stillness deep within its endless motion. Where the ancient lake had rested in silence, the river spoke in currents, in bends, in whispers against the shore. Elias stood quietly beneath the canopy of the modern Amazon, listening. The forest no longer felt like a place built on absence, but on inheritance. Everything around him, the towering trees, the tangled roots, the thick air heavy with life, felt like a continuation rather than a replacement. The lake had not vanished. It had simply learned how to breathe differently. Rain began to fall, warm and steady, soaking into the earth the way it had millions of years before. Elias tilted his face upward, letting the water wash over him. Each drop felt ancient, recycled through time, having fallen on water, on forest, on stone, countless times before. Nothing here was new. Nothing here was wasted. The river swelled gently, responding to the rain as it always had. It carried stories in its flow, stories written in sediment, in minerals, in the quiet chemistry of life itself. Fish darted beneath the surface, their bodies shaped by currents rather than stillness. They were descendants of the lake's children, adapted not to patience, but to persistence. Along the banks, trees rose tall and dense, their roots gripping soil once softened by endless water. Leaves filtered sunlight into a green glow that felt almost sacred. Insects buzzed, birds called, life layered itself thickly upon life. The Amazon rainforest pulsed with energy, urgency, and sound, a stark contrast to the calm world that had once existed here. And yet, beneath it all, Elias felt the lake. It was in the way the land still held moisture so willingly, in the way floods arrive seasonally, reminding the forest of its aquatic past, in the way the river widened and slowed in places, as if remembering how to rest. The past had not been erased. It had been woven into the present. Elias thought about humanity's brief moment on this timeline, how small it was, how loud, how fragile. Humans had arrived in a world already ancient, already shaped by countless transformations, and yet, they behaved as though permanence belonged to them. He felt a quiet responsibility settle into his chest, not the burden of guilt, but the weight of awareness. To understand the Earth's past was not merely to admire it, but to recognize the pattern repeating itself. Change was constant, balance was rare, and once broken, it took millions of years to rebuild. Indigenous communities along the river understood this in ways science often struggled to articulate. They did not see the forest as a resource, but as a relative. The river was not owned, it was respected. Stories passed down through generations spoke of water as memory, of land as living presence. Without knowing the language of geology, they understood its truth. The Amazon, in all its complexity, was not just a forest, it was a living archive, a breathing reminder of what happens when nature is allowed to shape itself. Elias watched the river disappear into the distance, flowing toward an ocean it had never known in its earliest form. That journey, long, patient, inevitable, felt like a lesson humanity still needed to learn. Forward movement did not have to mean destruction. Change did not have to mean forgetting. The ancient lake had taught life how to exist in abundance without excess. The river now taught life how to move without losing itself. As dusk approached, the forest softened, sound shifted, the river darkened, reflecting the deepening sky. Elias felt calm settle over him, the kind of calm that comes not from certainty, but from acceptance. The world would continue to change. Forests would rise and fall. Rivers would shift. Humanity would either learn or disappear like so many worlds before it. The earth would remain. He imagined the ancient lake one last time, not with sadness, but with gratitude. It had existed fully. It had given generously. It had let go when it was time. There was dignity in that. The rain slowed, then stopped. Night settled gently over the Amazon. Stars appeared between drifting clouds, their light mirrored faintly in the river below. The water moved steadily, endlessly, carrying echoes of stillness into the dark. Elias turned away from the river and began his walk back through the forest, footsteps soft against the ground. Behind him, the Amazon continued its quiet work, shaping the world moment by moment, breath by breath. And somewhere beneath the roots, beneath the flow, beneath time itself, the ancient lake rested, not gone, not forgotten, but transformed. As you drift toward sleep, let that thought settle gently within you. The world has lived many lives before this one. It will live many after. Change is not the enemy. Forgetting is. The river flows on. The earth remembers. And in that remembering, there is peace. Please like, share and subscribe my channel.